Welcome to the next part of this video series on the lecture video series for Chapter 8. This is video 3 of 12. We're going to be talking about the vCenter server. You have to have a vCenter server in order to have a fully functioning VMware data center. You can get away with host virtualization on ESXi hosts, which are individually managed, but that's clunky. And a lot of the really fun stuff, DRS, vMotion, storage vMotion, high availability, fault tolerance, all that stuff is only possible if there is a vCenter server in the mix. Your vCenter server is your management agent for all of your ESXi hosts in a vSphere data center. Now, when we use the word data center, we have two different meanings of the word, and you can tell the difference between those two things, and this is something we'll touch on in video 6 as well, and 7. Yeah. If you see data center, all one word, that is essentially vSphere's term for a cluster of hosts functioning together. A data center, data space center, that's what we're building as a whole. So your virtualized data center, your SDDC, or your physical DDC, may actually contain multiple data centers. Anyway, so your vCenter server is going to actively manage your ESXi hosts. It manages your migration. It monitors your performance, your virtual networks. It allows you to have things like distributed switches, etc. Now, there are a number of components. Now, the first thing we need to note here with these components, as we're talking about these things, this is what was true with ESXi 6.0. Now that we're up to 6.7, some of these things are no longer true. In particular, when we talk about the platform services controller, we'll talk about that in a minute. The two main components of these are the platform services controller and the vCenter server. In the old day, previously, you could have the vCenter server without the platform services controller. These days, that old option has been deprecated, which you will actually see in some of the demo videos that I've made using the more current technology. That option is literally not available. Now, your vSphere platform services, that's your vCenter single sign-on, your license service, your lookup service, your certificate authority. The center is most of the vCenter server is most of the things we work with on a daily basis. The server, the web client, your inventory, your deployment, your syslog services. So when we talk about things, say, relevant to the security courses, auditing, log management, etc., this thing uses syslog, like a lot of other Unix-based systems use syslog. So they can send them over the network. You can also reach them locally. There are a number of different logs that you can look at right on your ESXi hosts. We haven't really touched on that. I might actually do a video about that later. Anyway, so as I said, this is true. The separate installation or embedded services controller, this was true of 6.0. This is not true of 6.7 now. So these days, so you'll be doing something in your MindTap labs that you will not do in the real world, but I'm also working on some demo videos so you can see what it looks like now using 6.7, using my platform. Now, a single vCenter server with an embedded platform services controller and an embedded PSC can manage 1,000 hosts and 10,000 powered on VMs. A smaller, and now some of this will depend on the size of the vCenter server that you deploy. A tiny host with a small database will not have that much horsepower under the hood. A much larger system can manage more. So we're talking ultimately about not necessarily the little bitty data centers we're building here in the lab, but really big data centers, server farms, just massive amounts of storage and compute power. So In the old days, you could have the vCenter server and the platform services controller, and potentially you could have a different vCenter server for each cluster, with or without that platform services controller embedded. Now, particularly if you've got a large data center or large software-defined data centers spread out across a region, it would be better to have multiple. And this is the old way of doing things. You could essentially use your external platform services controller to manage multiple vCenter servers, the way you would now use a vCenter server with an embedded platform services controller to manage multiple hosts. So you take that centralization and you scale it up one more level. That's how it worked before. Doesn't work that way now. But with so on a smaller scale, say, well, a large data center, but still a single campus, you might want different vCenter servers doing for I don't know, different clients. For example, you've built a cloud. If you've got multiple tenants, multiple big tenants, each of those might actually need its own little chunk of your cloud that you've built, with its own server, etc. So it kind of looks a bit like this. This is the external platform services controller. As I mentioned, this model is deprecated. This is how it would have worked before. You could use a VM with a platform services controller to talk to vCenter servers in other places. All of these things can themselves be virtual machines. And that's one of the things that this is an activity that you'll skip, that it was kind of done for you, not in MindTap activity 8.4, where you actually build your own vCenter server. As I'm sure I've mentioned before, this process is fiddly, fragile, picky. So pay close attention to what you're doing, and be prepared to start over. If you get working to a certain point and you can safely take a snapshot, do it, so that you don't have to start over. Because otherwise you may have to just start over from scratch. Now, there are a couple different ways to install the vCenter server and the vCenter server appliance. We'll talk about those in the next video. So this is the model. This is the model you need to internalize, because this is how things work now. You've got your vCenter server. You've got your embedded platform services controller. That platform services controller, the vCenter server, that's going to talk to the vCenter agents on all of your ESXi hosts. Now, one thing to note before we go on. Now, we said that your vCenter server manages your data center. It needs to be actively engaged with your ESXi hosts. But your ESXi hosts can survive a loss of contact with their vCenter server. Say, for example, you have the management network goes sideways on you, or the host that is hosting the VCSA, it dies on you before you can move it. Just because the management agents on those ESXi hosts stop hearing from the vCenter server, they're not going to stop doing their job. They're not going to work as well. But for VMs that are running, they will keep running. vMotion will become impossible. Your distributed switches may not work quite as well, but losing your vCenter server is a problem you need to solve right now. But it will not completely bring your data center to its knees just because they lose contact with it for a while. So there's that. So in summation, no, not that one. This one, yes. Internalize this. You've got your platform services controller. It's talking to your database. A lot of this stuff is stored in databases. There's a PostgreSQL database running under the hood that, just like the SQL database that you need for System Center but don't ever touch, yeah, there's the same thing is going on here. There's stuff going on under the hood that you'll never touch. There's a single sign-on service. You've got your vSphere client talking to your vCenter server, also to your ESXi host. Now, and like I said, with it's sort of in parallel to the the ESXi hosts being able to function without the vCenter server, at least temporarily. Unless you go into a hard lockdown mode so that you can only talk to those hosts from your vCenter web client, your vCenter web, yes, your vCenter web client, that's what I said. You can still locally manage those individual hosts. If you're not in a full lockdown mode, you may actually literally be able to go to those hosts directly and plug in a console, use the DCUI for the most basic level of administration and rescue. So as you're building these things, think about how much control you need, or which troubleshooting tools you are willing to take out of your own toolkit. And depending on your circumstances, there's a case to be made for both, for either leaving everything up so you don't close all your own back doors, or closing everything down so there are no back doors, depending on your security posture. Either answer could be right. So thank you. On the next video, we'll talk about installing vCenter Server and the vCenter server appliance. Thanks. Bye.